Hello everyone, today we're going to be learning how to color correct / color grade. So first off, go to Window, Workspace, and Color. So for the structure of the video, I'll be going over what's color correction versus color grading, Lumetri Color menu in its entirety, Lumetri scopes, and all the different formats they have here, editing a source clip versus the sequence clip, when to grade using these adjustment layer versus editing a clip, grading log footage as shown here, and then lastly using masks for color correction. Starting off, color correction is defined by correcting clips to look the exact same. For example, we take this clip here, which is recording on the Sony FX3, and then we try to match it to this camera from the Panasonic G9 Mark II. So correcting basically means having these two clips look the exact same. As you see here, we look at this clip and look at that clip, they look drastically different. So color correction would essentially be adjusting these sliders to make them look similar. Color grading refers to adding that film look to a clip. So for example, take a look at this clip. Originally it looks like this. And then color grading refers to adding any color to achieve whatever desired look you want to it. So correction is matching two clips that look the same. So it'd be brightness, exposure, contrast. And then color grading is to add that personal sense to do storytelling. Like for this is meant to be like a high-paced montage. So we have underexposed look to it to add to the story, I guess, for this montage. Now, going over the Lumetri Color, we have our color, temperature. As you see here, slide to the left, more blue, slide to the right, more orange. Tint, slide to the left for green, slide to the right for pink. Saturation, making colors pop or not pop. In this case, making it black and white. We also have this tool here called white balance, which essentially allows us to have the footage look a certain color. For example, we pick the widest point of the frame, say like here. Premiere automatically adjusts tint and temperature to match that level of whiteness. Normally I really don't use this tool, I just adjust it manually to get my look, but you can do that. So going down to light, we have our exposure, which increases or decreases the light in our frame. Contrast, which goes over the darkness or shadows, either illuminating or deilluminating them, as you see here. Highlights refer to, later on when I mention Lumetri scopes, by highlighting the certain highest levels of our luminosity region. We can either make it brighter or darker. Our shadows refers to the bottom section of our luminosity. So you can either make it darker or brighter. Our whites just directly adjusts any white areas of the clip, such as so, making it brighter, darker. Our blacks does the opposite, where we directly adjust our blacks, making it either darker or brighter. Creative tab, we can add a certain film look, as we see here. So for example, I do Fuji F1.25 Kodak. This is the look it will give it. Or we do SL Clean Kodak C, Gold Western. These basically applies those film looks you see like in movies. Of course, these can always be bought or found online, and you can always just import and choose whatever look you like. Normally I don't add any of this to videos, but if you're working on a project, personal client, whatever, and they want a film look, you can refer to this section here. Always make further adjustments to the look. For example, you make it like it's faded film, sharpen or de-sharpen, vibrance, and then another saturation tab. Of course, yeah, your tint balance is here. If you mess with these sliders here, for example, you do the however you like. I personally never touch this tab for Aggie Studios, but it's always here and it's good to know. Going on to curves, this is one of the most important tabs in the whole Lumetri Color. So we have our RGB. This is directly working with specific colors of the RGB spectrum. So for example, we have our whites here. From here downwards refers to shadows. This is our midtones. And then finally we have our highlights up here. So for example, if I go to our shadows and I add a keyframe here and I pull it down, you can see we make them darker. I push it up, makes them brighter. As you can see here, makes a curve. However, we add a keyframe here, for example, double click to reset, make a keyframe here, and then start adjusting again. You'll see we have way more fine control. We can imagine this as a pivot point. The most typical curve I would use would be called an S curve, where we make a keyframe right here in the direct middle, make it create here right in the intersection of these two lines, and then push it down. And as well, up here at this two line. And this is called an S curve. This is kind of the most typical curve you'll see. As you see, we push our highlights, but we push down our shadows at the same time while making a little bit of adjustments to our midtones. Of course, you can always be more precise. For example, if I want our midtones to be more brighter, make this up here. Maybe some of our highlights a little bit more down, and here you get far more control over your highlights. Hue versus saturation. So this refers to picking out a specific color along this line and then affecting the saturation. So for example, if we use our color picker tool, we pick flory sweater, we have our 3 points. When you use the color dropper tool, the specific color you've chosen will always be the middle part. For example, if I, for whatever reason, decide to move here, you'll see it affects the entire curve. Pick out her sweater on this color right here, push it up, make it more saturated, push it down, and we desaturate it. So that's hue versus saturation, where we directly affect the saturation of a specific color. Hue versus hue, this is where you change a color to another color. For example, once again, if we go to your sweater and we want to change it, for example, we can see the colors on the y-axis. So we move up, we go to our greens, yellows, and reds. We move it down, we move to blue, pinks, and red. So you'll want to make it like a dark blue, or now magenta. You can see exactly that. Move it up, move it green. So another key point, you can move it left or right. So for example, if I had it directly in the middle again, you'll see it kind of has that weird bluish still you can see to it. However, I move it to the right. Now I change the color altogether. You see here, this is kind of more of a mixed color. See, this is directly. However, you see in the panels behind Flora, you can see I'm also affecting all the fuse boxes up here. So I would say be very careful. You can see it messes with the jeans. So you move, like for example, I wanted to shift it a little bit. You can see it's more subtle. Very powerful tool, and it can affect a lot in the scene. Hue versus Luma. Basically, you could change the brightness of a specific color. So once again, I want to make her sort of more darker. Push it down, make it more lighter, push it up. Luma versus saturation. You can directly affect the saturation of the brightness. Once again, I don't really ever touch these curves. You could guess this is more for a creative look. This is saturation versus saturation. This tools, you could directly have more fine control over saturation or color. So for example, I want to make certain parts more saturated and certain other parts not saturated. This is a tool to use. Moving on to color with some match. This is where you directly add color to specific luminosity. So for example, in our shadows, if I open this up, you see in the middle is directly white. If I move it to the pink, you see all our shadows turn pink, green, red, blue. So this is just injecting color into whatever part of the luminosity curve as I showed earlier. So for example, I like to make very minor adjustments, so I never move it past here. I always stick to around the middle. Let me see if I make this bigger. So this is where typically I make my adjustments. I just make them very fine. Double click to reset, and you can just move it to wherever you like. These sliders here, another exposure, of course, or midtone, same concept. Directly adding colors to our midtones. This is more like color grading. So you want a specific look, like we want to make them, we see here the middle, we'll move it, we can make it a little bit more blue. Our highlights, you can see they're a little bit more on the orange side. Maybe you wanted to interject some blue to counteract it, or we could add more, however you prefer. Moving on to HSL Secondary. This is where we have way more precise control over specific color. So for example, if I set our color, the blues, so we could refine the selection that Premiere picked, so we could see all of this is what we're editing. So here, we could denoise it. We could blur it. And then right here on this tab, we directly are editing that color. So this is a tab just to see what you're editing. So you can make it black and white and black. You see here, we invert it. We can see what color we're affecting. This is our luminosity curve. This is a saturation curve. And this is a hue curve. So if we expand these sliders, we are picking out way more colors. This, expanding our saturation, luminosity. Once we selected our color, we can make direct corrections to them. So we can make it warmer. So you see, make it warmer. Change the tint, where we want to do to that specific color. Moving on, vignette. This directly adds vignette. Move it to the left, black vignette. To the right, it's a white vignette. I typically like to add a darker vignette, as shown here. Midpoint refers to the inner circle. And we see here, this is our oval. Move to the left, we make it way more wider and more rectangle here. Move to the right, and we barely have those curves here. For example, if I increase the feathering, which is our oval, and I put it all the way to the left, you can see our direct vignette. So midpoint, decrease the shape of the oval, increase the shape of the oval. Roundness, that's a nice suggest. Roundness of the oval, make this a circle, make this almost a rectangle. I typically just leave it as normal. You can always play with this. Moving on to our Lumetri scopes. We have 4 different graphs here. We have Waveform, Parade, Histogram, and Wavescope. So starting off, let's go to presets, Vectorscope. So this directly talks about our hue and saturation of a specific color. This inner boundary here is the boundaries of a specific color that you may see. If it goes outside, that's typically peaking or out of balance. And the whole point of using Lumetri scopes, as you may know, not all of our monitors, phone screens are the same. So using Lumetri scope is kind of like a general standard for color correction. This line right here refers to skin tones. So if we want to adjust for skin tones, we will try to get the colors to this line as close as possible. So for example, if we push our temperature around to the blues, you can see all of the colors trend to the blues. Do the opposite, you see the difference. Same thing with our tint. It all goes to the green, pink. Also our saturation does affect this too. So we're expanding the inner, and then we can also despan. So also our exposure, you see here, we're starting to lose information. Contrast, highlights, shadows, and whatnot. So if we want to work for the skin tone, we'll just move these sliders to aim for that. So for example, we'll see we'll probably want to push it to the warm, probably push it a little bit to the pink, and then probably a little bit of saturation. As you can see here, now we adjusted for skin tone. Moving on to Parade. This is just giving us information about specific colors. These numbers from 0 to 100 refers to a luminosity scale again, with the bottom like around 30 to 0 being our shadows, 30 to 60 being our midtones, and 60 to 100 being our highlights. If we see lines like this, for example, that means we're picking color information, causing us to lose that. For example, if I push this to the orange, now we're starting to lose information in our reds, as indicated by here, and then some parts of the frame. We push to the blue, we're starting to peak here and lose information. For example, if I do more drastic, if I go to the curve, now you're basically losing a lot of information, as you see here by this line. Same thing with green, we're losing much information. While moving on to Waveform, now this is all direct color information we have in this frame. Like we see, we have a bunch of information here. If we change our waveform to Luma, Now we're getting information about our exposure. So once again, shadows, midtones, highlights, any lines we see is basically this information. And as well, we can see where our general light is. So we can see it's aiming more towards the midtones and shadows. For example, we push our exposure up. We're seeing all the midtones rise. But as we see, as we go to 100, now we're starting to peak until we lose too much information, as shown here and in the frame. So once again, you could just up the exposure until we're not losing too much information. Probably like around there. Every other slider affects our luminosity. For example, our contrast, we'll see our midtones being pushed out. Once again, don't let it peak. It's probably around here. Highlights, we see here being all brought up. Even when we put it all the way to 0, we're still not losing no information. However, we push it all the way up, now we're starting to lose a little bit. For the majority of the part, we have way more freedom with the highlight as it's working directly with the upper sections. So push this up a little bit. Shadows to here towards the bottom region, depending on what look we want to go for. We can push all the way down, barely lose any information. Push all the way up, and we're starting to see a little bit of noisiness. But our whites, now this is way more drastic. As you here, once again, just have it so it doesn't peak. Blacks as well. We see this is way more. This one you probably want to adjust a little bit, so like 0.5. It's already getting noisy in these sections here, so probably like 0.1. Moving on, histogram. So if you work with Photoshop or Lightroom, you may recognize this. This is directly with our colors. We see there's a lot of pink and a lot of blue. Now, moving on to grading a source versus sequence clip. So on this tab, this is our sequence clip, meaning all our changes to Lumetri Color will only apply to this clip in general. But however, let's say we have a bunch of cuts here and none of them have the color effect, for example, like here. So rather than copying and pasting the Lumetri Color, that's like this, rather than doing this for all of them, rather, if you know using the same clip over and over again with just cuts, instead of just copy and pasting the color grade, what you could do is go over to your color grade, copy it, and then apply it to the whole sequence. As you can see here, on our sequence color grade, we have nothing. However, we go to the source, this is kind of like our master color grade for the whole thing. So you can see now every clip here with the same name have that color grade. And any changes we make here will pop up in our source tab. For example, I push out blue, every other clip will be the same thing, even though I made it a change in one clip or one section. However, we still be able to refine specific clips. For example, we can still make changes to our color grade here. Make it whatever, and you see, doesn't affect nothing else. So you're working in a video or project where it's just the same clip and just cut up, you could just go on over to the source clip. So when you want to use adjustment layer is when you have your base color corrections on your clips, and then you want your overall color grade to apply over a large sequence of clips. For example, if I ran ahead and corrected these, I could go over here and then start adjusting wherever it may be to achieve a more, for most cases, it would be like a LUT or something. So I could go over here, select the LUT. So you apply your final look onto the adjustment layer. So you can however you want, you could color correct individual clips, and then finally apply a LUT or your color grade on the adjustment layer. Typically I like to do it all at once since, you know, Accuracy is not that difficult in terms of color grading, but however for client work, films, whatever it may be, good thing to use adjustment layers. Moving on, we'll go over log footage and how to color correct. So for example, this clip we could use. So firstly, log footage is essentially letting the camera expand its dynamic range by having a low contrast and use muted color. This essentially gives you the most flexibility with color grading and to achieve whatever look you're going for. For movies, whatever, whatnot, typically shoot in log, and then they convert it and work with it. So typically what some people may do starting off is convert the log footage to standard color space known as Rec. 709. For example, this one, the camera shot on Vlog Panasonic. Go here, and now it basically converts to 709. However, I like to do it manually. So the first thing you want to do, crank up your saturation to about like 150, 170, whatever it may feel like, and your contrast. You may also do the same with your shadows. And most importantly, you're going to add in that S curve. Good thing to pull up would be your Lumetri scope and have it set to Luma. I can see here, we still have a lot of room to play with. So you can go to our curve, pull that down, pull this up. Now here, we go to our highlights. I did forget, this is basically our color correction. If I buff that up a little bit, get to our shadows, see here, go to our whites, bump those up a little bit, blacks. I can see we have a lot more flexibility with our blacks. So I'll probably put them down here. We can go to our temperature, make this a little bit more warm, tint. We can switch over. Another thing I like to do, I like to bump up the pink. So after we finish color correcting, now we could do our grade. Here you could either just do an adjustment layer as before, or LUT, or whatever it may be. So we go with our autumn, and we see a little bit of that difference. So you can either do it manually, or you can use the LUT. Example, bang. Whatever you prefer to use. See the difference manually, and then LUTs. So next up, we'll be going over when to use mask for color correction. For example, I'm gonna pull up this clip here. Firstly, breakdown on this video. This is shot in log. So I went ahead and graded and corrected on our source. This is shot in the shadows. So before, you can see Brooke was very underexposed, and then basically I went ahead and added in the Lumetri Color, and I used these to add a mask. So I went ahead and drew the mask around her face, feather it out a lot, since, for example, if you do not feather it out, you get like a white circle here. So same principle as the vignette. I want to feather this out a lot. Of course, the less the number, the greater the effect. So here, barely see it at all. So if I see it like right there, our expansion, we increase the size, for example, like that, whatever you may like. I prefer it like this. Of course, you can see around her maybe a little bit overexposed. So for example, and from here, you can go ahead and play around with the exposure settings to brighten her up. I prefer to do this method over just brightening up the entire scene, since if I were to overexpose the whole scene, then we started to lose information over here in the skies. Like for example, as you see here, in the background, we started to lose that information. So that's the reason why we want to use a mask for overexposing certain parts of a subject. Go like that, and then you can just fine tune the mask to whatever it may be like. This is the same principles as, I would say, Lightroom when you're working with mask. Another use case where I use the mask would be here. Our mask here was created around the screen, and then I went ahead and inverted the mask. The reason why is because I wanted to brighten up everything else besides the screen, as without it, for example, we turn this off. If I went ahead and corrected normally, we'll see our screen lose that information. However, by using a mask and then inverting it, so for example, you see I drew the mask around the screen, I could go ahead and overexpose or expose properly for all this without losing the information in the screen. So once again, it's like that, and then I expose everything else. So other than that, I think that's about everything I can think of for color grading. you have any questions, or if you want more clarification on a certain topic, please just let me know. And yeah, thank you.